Hey, what's up folks, how's it going? This is Watch. Hope you guys are all doing well. And today we're going to be doing a head-to-head smartphone camera comparison between two of the best smartphone cameras on the planet right now. We're talking about the iPhone 12 Pro Max versus the Samsung Galaxy Note 20 Ultra. We're going to be taking a look at the stills capabilities, the video capabilities, but kind of concentrating on the main wide camera. And on the iPhone 12 Pro Max, it's actually a unique feature in the fact that the main sensor is actually larger than the standard iPhone 12 lineup, in the fact that it's 12 megapixels, but it has a pixel size rating of about 1.7 microns across. Now on the Note 20 Ultra, we have 108 megapixel stills capability, which gives it a pixel size rating of about 0.8 microns across, certainly a lot smaller than the iPhone, which might give the iPhone a little bit of an edge up in terms of low light performance, but we'll have to be the judge of that later on in our test. Now, another key distinction on the iPhone is that we have sensor shift technology. So instead of the heavier lens element used for optical stabilization, the actual imaging sensor moves from X-Y axis. Apple says that this will result in both smoother looking video and also higher capabilities in terms of stabilizing your stills shots in night mode and things like that. So we'll definitely take a look at that. We'll take a look at the 65mm telephoto cameras that are on both of these. Both have 5 times optical zoom from the widest to the most telephoto camera, and both have a 12 megapixel ultra wide cameras. Both can do 4K at 60 frames per second, and we'll go through some sharpness examples, color rendition, the HDR capabilities, as well as the video in both good lighting and poorly lit conditions, kind of at nighttime. So if you're interested in finding out which camera reigns supreme, this is a perfect video for you, and let's get right into it. Okay, so let's go over some side-by-side examples to give you guys in terms of what I'm experiencing out of both cameras. In terms of sharpness, let's take a look at some outdoor examples. Here we have this board infographic at a park, and as you can see, generally the iPhone has a higher kind of contrast ratio. You have a very bright brights and darker darks in the text area, and zoomed out, it looks great. You really can't see any big sharpness differences between the 108 megapixel camera that we have on the Samsung. But once we start to zoom in, the 12 megapixels versus 108 megapixels becomes definitely more apparent, where we can actually read out all the ultra fine details in the text, and it's quite legible, unlike the illegible text on the 12 megapixel camera on the iPhone. So in scenarios like this where you need to zoom really in close to actually read fine text or to get more details about your shot, this is where the Note 20 is going to really shine and outperform the iPhone. Now, at the same vantage point, and now switching over to the telephoto cameras, we can kind of see the same kind of trend where the Note 20 Ultra is actually rendering out sharper text details, and it's super legible, and the pixels don't really fall apart as much as we see in this particular shot on the iPhone 12 Pro Max. Now, here's another good example of where the Samsung is a little bit sharper than the iPhone. On the trees and river in the background of this shot, you can see that things are a little bit sharper and better defined, and in the foreground you can see that this broken off tree branch is clear, has better details preserved on the Samsung as well compared to the iPhone. Now the same trend kind of follows when you go indoors. Here we have this IKEA bookshelf, and again, zoomed out, it looks great on both smartphones, and in fact at times the iPhone looks a little bit sharper because of the higher contrast setting by default. But once we start to zoom in and take a look at this hanging tag in this glass compartment, you can actually read read the fine text on the Note 20 versus on the iPhone. The pixels kind of fade out and it becomes considerably more blurry and illegible again. Now moving forward, let's take a look at the portrait modes on both phones. Now taking a look at this shot of myself, you can see that the Note renders out again sharper overall details. The contrast level is actually a little bit higher than the iPhone. The iPhone kind of renders things out a little bit more neutral, which definitely can have its bonuses if you're looking for a more subtle, more flattering look, especially in facial features and skin textures. That could be definitely a good thing. And in terms of the separation between the subject and the background, both do a relatively good job of replicating that fake lens blur bokeh effect, both on real life subjects as well as artificial ones such as Boba Fett that we have over here, as well as the T800. Now moving forward, let's take a look at some landscape photography shots in HDR mode. Now on the iPhone, the trend is fairly high contrast ratios, but it still does a great job of preserving all the details in the highlights and shadows. And the Note in general looks a lot more neutral, a lot more natural, and that could certainly be a benefit in the sense that it more realistically interprets the scene that you're looking at with the naked eye, versus the iPhone likes to kind of exaggerate things and make them look possibly better what they are in real life. Take a look at this example of the mountain sunset scene. We can see a greater level of contrast on the iPhone, as well as deeper colors, higher contrast, and more drama and dynamics in the cloud details and textures in the sky, versus the Samsung Note 20 Ultra is definitely a little bit more neutral. Certainly doesn't have the brighter brights or the darker darks, but does a great job of preserving all the details both in the highlights and shadows while not exaggerating too much. In terms of the telephoto capabilities outside, when we zoom in to this particular shot on the iPhone, we have a, again, higher level of contrast ratio, a lot of details and information in the clouds. The image is slightly noisier than what we encounter with the Note 20 Ultra, which preserves a lot more shadow details and definitely a cleaner overall looking image with finer details that can be rendered out a little bit more clear in the distant background. Furthermore, I did a lot of tests in night mode, doing a lot of nighttime photography, and I was super impressed with both phones. The level of details that they can render out in a scene that has a very minimal amount of visible light. A shot like this would pretty much be impossible without a DSLR camera and a high-quality tripod, but thanks to machine learning-enabled predictive algorithms that stabilize your long exposure shots, we can have nightscape photography capabilities on smartphones that have very minimal amount of noise and do a great job of preserving and expressing what you see with the naked eye. Now, in terms of which one looks best, certainly the iPhone 12 Pro Max is the best low light photography camera because it has the larger sensor on the iPhone lineup, but it does tend to crush the blacks a little bit more. We have better shadow details on the Samsung Note 20 Ultra. That's not necessarily because it has a superior lens and sensor combination. It's probably due to the fact that the contrast level is set a little bit lower than the iPhone, which tends to want to emphasize the highlights and blacks to make things a little bit more poppy, especially on the smaller smartphone screens, but when we start blowing things up, you'll actually notice that we have more details preserved, especially in the shadows on the Note 20 Ultra. Now, in terms of sharpness, a good example is where we can see that the front of the door and the windows are slightly clear and better defined on the Samsung than the iPhone. The iPhone still looks great, but when we start to zoom in, you can see a little bit more refined edges, and all the fine crevices and smaller details are better preserved on the Note 20 Ultra compared to the iPhone. Another thing that I noticed, and although this happens on both cameras depending upon the specific scenario that you're shooting in, but you'll notice that there's this outer glow and kind of a boomy effect that you get out of certain light fixtures on the iPhone, and that kind of outer glow effect is less apparent on the Note 20 Ultra most of the times. You can still get it. It depends on the specific scenario and how the ISP process your particular shot, because there's a lot of post-processing going on over here, but generally it does a better job of representing, again, what your eye sees in real life. Moving on, let's talk about the 60 frames per second 4K video capturing capabilities. I did notice that the Samsung definitely likes to over sharpen things at times, and as a result of that, there is more noise apparent in the footage, and the iPhone is generally cleaner, smoother looking, and although might not be as sharp at times, I do definitely prefer the look look of it a little bit more to the Samsung. And the big advantage is certainly the stabilization system, thanks to the sensor shift technology built inside the shots when you're using it handheld or with even a Steadicam rig of some sort, is definitely going to look smoother, and certainly handheld, the footage coming out of the iPhone is way better and smoother than the Samsung Note 20 Ultra optical stabilization system. Furthermore, we do have Dolby Vision 10-bit video capturing capabilities on the iPhone, and that will give you the advantage of getting a little bit more details preserved in the highlights and shadows, where you can bring those details out and do a little bit more post-production with it. You can potentially have a higher bitrate on the video as well, but in terms of general video distribution, looking at the Samsung Note 20 Ultra HDR video footage compared to the iPhone, I really don't see a big advantage in terms of getting more details out of the shadow and highlights, even out of the 8-bit footage out of the Samsung. So for most purposes, you're not going to see that benefit coming from the iPhone, but you are going to see less overall noise and better low light performance in video. That is definitely a big advantage on the iPhone. The Samsung pretty much looks terrible in a low light nighttime scenario when you're using the video at 4K resolution, 30 FPS or 60 FPS. It's pretty garbage. There's a lot of lens flaring issues with the phone, as you can see over here, and although the iPhone does have it too, the image is way clearer and definitely a lot more usable. But really, on that, guys, that's really it. As a summary, I would say that in terms of the stills capabilities, the Note 20 Ultra is probably my preference, but from a video standpoint, I think the iPhone 12 Pro Max is a clear winner. The videos are a little bit softer at times, but generally the color rendition is really nice, and it's a lot more cleaner image, especially when you're shooting in lower dimly lit conditions, where the Note 20 Ultra really struggles in video mode compared to the iPhone 12 Pro Max. So that is pretty much my opinion thus far. In terms of stills, the Note is better, and in terms of video, the iPhone is better. Definitely love to hear your thoughts. If you haven't done so already, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, because we're also going to be coming out with a battery life comparison between the two to determine which is the best smartphone from a battery life standpoint, as well as we're going to be doing an ultimate battery life comparison test coming out very, very soon. So make sure you have post notifications turned on, like this video if you haven't done so already, and subscribe again. Big thank you to your support. We'll see you real soon. Take care.